Hello, beautiful souls. This is Masami. I hope you are doing well. Today, I'm here with Chris, my husband, to go over this wonderful, wonderful week that is ahead of us, especially August 8th, the powerful Lionsgate, kind of a pivotal point of the month and the year that is coming up. And we are going to be discussing our modes switching towards receiving mode and how to create that bigger space portal for receiving and what does it mean to receive. Okay, so let's go into the August 8th for a brief moment here. As I said, it's the power day that is coming up. It's this Lionsgate portal that's opened up already, but it is going to get to the crescendo on August 8th. And it's a great and perfect reset moment for all of us. And it's not just a power day, but it's powerfully balancing kind of a day. One is because it's the halfway point between solstice that we welcomed in late June and equinox that is coming up in late September. So calendar wise, seasonal wise, it's kind of this midpoint. But I see the August 8th as it's like climbing the mountains and you're just getting to this top area, and then you're going to be going down and descending to back to maybe you parked your car before you started your hike in the morning. So it's a great check-in point, and it's time when you tune back into your heart and take the actions based on the alignment of your own heart. So, in other words, I think the August 8th is going to be the master intention day for how to receive. What does that mean to receive? Define receiving much more than I'm just going to want to get something. So, receiving is very different than taking or getting. And I think many of us really do know that, feel that, but how's that showing up in your life? So that is what Chris and I are going to be discussing shortly here. Chris, you have anything to add here before we get into it?
Well, hello everybody. First of all, and I think that this is something that I maybe like many of you, I've been feeling this last week or so very strongly, and so to open into this next round of what's happening during this month of August, which Masami has described as being a cosmic event, not just a powerful month, is something to really step back from your normal way of looking and thinking and doing things and pay attention. Okay, really pay attention because that's where so much of this is going to come in from. And we'll say a bit more about that as we talk about what it means to open up to receiving.
So this is the topic that we are all exploring in this group that I have been guiding and being guided to teach the Venus Retrograde program that I started at the end of July. But let's step back and talk about, I think, what's been going on overall as collective is that we've gotten quite good at releasing, I would think, and clearing and removing and maybe giving up, right? That's just been talked about so much. And I still believe that there's a beautiful practice behind that, and there's necessity for releasing and giving up or giving away or just clearing the surface and clearing your inner beings where you're getting stuck. But I also think that maybe using that word stuck, we got a little bit stuck in that practice alone. And we have gotten quite good at that, I think. And I see that in myself as well as in my clients and people that I work with. We've gotten really good at that and say, you know, I'm going to spend the weekend clearing, whether that's your closet or maybe your paperwork or maybe some things in your past, even karmic clearing and a karmic releasing, emotional clearing, trauma work to relieve yourself of some of these accumulated pain. We've done a great job. And but sometimes I think we have also gotten good at taking as well as we eliminate things and open up the spaces. We have actually gotten very good at taking. Taking is very different than receiving. And a taking culture has really accelerated during COVID with so much information out there for good reasons. You know, people were putting videos out there, people were writing emails, they were giving free courses and free products, and then do this for free and then show up for this summit for free. So there's been so much emphasis on here are things you can do anything you like on a free basis. But that has kind of shifted from the receiving. In the beginning was like a lot of this, like a graciously receiving that help, to just simply taking. So we want to contrast that. One, maybe graduate a little bit right now, especially the month of August during the Venus retrograde, from constantly focusing on releasing, and also define the difference between taking and receiving as well. And receiving can be quite uncomfortable. This is something Chris and I were talking about before coming on to record this, is that it's a vulnerable state in many ways for receiving. And receiving, sometimes it's like a receiving criticism, can be really, really hard. And, there are terminologies like it's better to give than to receive. So we've been taught so much to kind of hold back on this receiving side. But I think that tide is shifting. And, but in order to fully shift this tide from maybe clearing, removing, taking, to really understanding the beauty of receiving, I think we have to understand what it means to have a passive receiving versus active receiving. So I'm going to hand it over to Chris a little bit around this topic.
So one of the things that we really wanted to emphasize here is, well, first of all, what is receiving? I mean, it might seem like an obvious thing. I think it gets confused with the word getting, which is a different energy that's closer to the taking that Masami mentioned. And so this whole idea of active versus passive receiving, I want you to just think about what are you receiving right now? Just pause for a second. What are you receiving right now? And then I want to challenge you a little bit with this phrase, all is given. All is given. And so there's a certain background receiving that's always happening. And this is what we refer to this as the passive receiving. Just think about the basic things you don't even have to think about because we take them for granted. Having air to breathe, having water to drink, having a roof over our heads. And maybe not all of us actually are able to take that for granted. But those are things that are given to us just by virtue of being alive in this world. We have air, we have water, we have a ground to stand on, we have the earth providing things that sustain us in our lives. So to move from that passive state, which we can really easily just forget that we're even there receiving, and we are receiving, there's no question, we can actually move to an active state. But that active movement requires us to open up something in ourselves. And that's that vulnerability that Masami was mentioning earlier. It's uncomfortable, actually, for us, if we're not in the practice of doing this, to receive fully, because it means that we have to, in a way, expose something that's kind of tender in us. And Masami mentioned that the word like receiving criticism, and that might just be somebody or some kind of feedback is coming to you from your life that you might not want to take in fully, and maybe for good reason. But there are also so many other kinds of receiving that we can do actively that have to do with our way of being oriented to our lives, toward other people, and to just see all of the ways that there's basically a flood of blessing that's coming at us all the time. And some of it we participate in directly and consciously, and so much of it we're not even thinking about because it's always there. I might even make the argument that it's all always there. And it's really up to us to pay attention to it. So let's go with that for now. And Masami, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I think we will be exploring more around the topic of receiving during the course. But I think if we can just pause and think about even the smallest things that we are receiving, just the magic of receiving alone. Like you walk by somebody in the morning when you went for a walk and that person smiled. Just the corners of that person's mouth just lifted up a little bit. Maybe not full on smiles with the teeth and everything, but just that, can you receive that just naturally? Even just somebody raising their hands and just acknowledging that they were there. Or just recently I went to the post office and someone opened the door for me, and there was a third person that showed up. And so all of us were going, well, who's going to walk in through the door first? And they both, because I was coming in, they both just kind of put their hands in the front and said, go ahead. And I thought, okay. So then and I walked in, I received their go ahead, and then I thanked them. But just these little receiving that I think we are constantly being showered by this, but we're not stopping long enough to really notice it. And just a couple of days ago, I saw a UPS truck park right in front of us, and I was expecting a box of supplements. So I figured that he was coming to our house to drop it off. So I just kind of went outside and we both looked at each other because we just timed it perfectly when he was coming towards my door. And I just very gently opened my front door. And then we both looked at each other and said, "Oh, did you time it?" And I thought, well, I didn't necessarily time it, but it's kind of nice. And he just smiled. I smiled. I received the package from him with both of my hands. And I just said, "Thank you so much." It's kind of sometimes nice to receive a package from another human being, from somebody that is driving these packages around all across this country and the globe. And he smiled and said, "Yeah, it sure is." And, because it's most of the time, what I notice is the package is just left by the door and we're not actively getting involved in the receiving. And those are some of the things, even like sunshine, Chris mentioned about the earth that we stand on, the air we breathe, the rain that falls on us, the sunshine that comes afterwards, the sunset that is gloriously creating these beautiful imagery in front of us. We just fully get to receive. But I think most of the time we're just kind of in passing, not noticing that as a form of gift that you are receiving, just as you showed up for that UPS guy to
I, w-
grab.
I wanted to add to this too, this gesture, which so many of us are now somewhat trained to do. And it might be a gesture of prayer or honoring something, but just think about how many times you might have done this and think about how that relates to receiving. Because, the namaste, which is what this is called from the, Indian traditions, is it's bowing, it's honoring, recognizing and bowing to the divine in the other person and actually receiving their presence into yours as well. We might do this before we eat so that we receive with gratitude and receptivity the nutrients and the nourishment that is there in our food. And again, these are things that we might do somewhat automatically now without really, really tuning in and recognizing that these are actually profound moments of receiving that we can become more aware of, and we can do it much more consciously and elevate our own practice of this, especially during this month where everything is just wide open and sort of shooting all of this blessing at us, and it's just like a flood. And so to be able to recognize that and begin to take it into us in this very conscious way is so powerful.
And it's these small moments that if you can become conscious, like Chris said, it's the actively receiving for you to actively show up, like for me to open the door, time it just right so that I can receive this package from the other sets of hands towards my hands, from another person to another person. There's kind of active timing that had to happen. So if we can show up this month, August, but particularly this week with this Lion's Gate and this like a crescendo that we're experiencing just in this week, that we're not just passively getting and taking, but if you can fully engage in little moments of the little smiles and maybe the rainbows that you receive, and just by bringing this awareness, Chris and I have been able to receive various gifts from this earth and the universe. And one, maybe Chris wants to share quickly, but he's been asking actively to receive antlers. And do you want to say something about
Sure.
antlers?
This is a pretty personal example, and I wanted just to say that by honoring the receiving itself and by being conscious of it, we're actually honoring our interconnection with everything. Because I think that we get into that taking mode, or we flip on the other way and we're trying to give everything away or get rid of everything, release everything in those very unbalanced ways. But when we're able to honor the receiving side and bring the balance back, we actually get to feel how we are interconnected. And that might show up like it did for me, where I was looking for a kind of a sign in my life. And I was very specific about it. It was finding antlers in the forest. And it just so happened that this past weekend I didn't find one antler. I found three. I took 3 walks. I found 3 antlers, and part of that was the maybe the act of surrendering to not knowing how it would show up. And Masami might say something later about surrender, but the act of giving up how or when I might find it somehow opened up the receiving to finding it anytime, any place. And what do you know? It happened 3 times in 3 walks. So that's just one example, but there are infinite examples of the receiving that is going on for you in your own life all the time. So please use this time where everything is turned up, the receptivity is turned up right now, and tune into that and really take this time to do that.
Yeah, I think I'll just briefly say about the surrender because Chris brought up the word surrender. But surrender isn't to give up and just like fall backwards kind of a thing. But the word surrender really is active. There's an action involved in surrender, is to fully, above, beyond, contribute, to give back. That's what the word render is, to contribute. So surrendering is not necessarily you let go of everything and you're like, oh, I give up, there's nothing more I can do. But be actively involved in noticing the small gifts of life that is constantly giving. And then that's when you actively receive that. To me, surrender and perhaps, who knows, I'm just kind of tying these words together, but the surrendering and receiving may go really well together. And in fact, I was pulling cards this morning with looking at the Denise Lynn's cards. And I was asking, what do we need to know? What do we need to really keep in mind when we want to actively receive? And the card surrender showed up. And I just thought, okay, that's just perfect in terms of what we need to be doing, is that surrender isn't giving up. Surrender is to contribute, to step in to your life actively and above and beyond. So, Chris, do you have anything to add to that word surrender? Maybe my interpretation isn't quite right, but
Well, your interpretation is actually really accurate in terms of what the word means. It's just that we've taken it to mean um, quitting or giving ourselves over, and really there's a profound sense of opening up to the fullness of what we are, and that includes this receiving that we're talking about. Because I think a lot of us actually resist receiving because of that vulnerability we talked about earlier, that we close ourselves off to it because it has to often interact with that tender spot inside of us that we've learned all of our lives to keep protected, and to try to keep anything from harming it. So I do think that that's an element of the surrender too, is that we have to stay with the discomfort of it so that we can actually access and harness the fullness that is in us. And then, as you said, to go above and beyond and bring that back into relationship with what's outside of us, with the world, with others. So, yeah, I think there's a definite connection there. And anyway, I know we got one more thing to talk about with magnesium, and I'll let you transition us into that, and we'll go from there.
well, so I think it's a great segue to just mention, as you all, maybe not all of you, but many of you that have been listening to us for a long time, we're functional nutritional therapists and among other things, but we like to bring back this topic of receiving to the actual minerals in your body. And a particular mineral that we're talking about, Chris has mentioned, is magnesium. And magnesium is so helpful in terms of opening your hands, opening your heart center, opening your mind's eye, especially the third eye, in order to notice, actively notice what you're here to receive, what's been gifted to you. And that the magnesium can be very supportive of that action, and magnesium can actually awaken us to actively receive. So we wanted to bring up the importance of magnesium. And the sad thing too, and the reality is that the 75% of most of the world, but let's say in North America, so United States, and I would say even Canada, parts of Europe as well, we're just not getting enough magnesium. 75% of us are low on magnesium, and we are actually lacking in magnesium. And if we're not getting adequate, this mineral magnesium that is also, it's becoming invisible deficiency of the world right now, you're going to have a hard time really bringing up the energy enough to muster up the action to start receiving. And that's when you may notice things like you begin to hoard things, you start to collect things and you don't want to give out. You become very stingy with what you can actively give, and to involve yourself in giving your love out. You could get very clingy. You can start to hold tightly. And there are so many other things that the magnesiums do, because magnesium is involved in about 300 different actions in your body. Chris, you want to add other things that, I mean, they do so much. So,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
we've done a
yeah,
PDF, so we will put a
yeah,
link to it.
let's use that as our tool. We'll put a link to the PDF. You can sign up to grab that. We've also done an extensive video about magnesium, but I want to just comment on
Are
something.
you going to put the link on
Yeah,
that below
yeah,
for that?
the links will be below in the comments, the description. So what I want to point out is one of the nicknames of magnesium is it's often referred to as the lion mineral. And Masami has done this in a previous presentation, but she's mentioned how magnesium acts as the bridge between the known and the unknown worlds. And you can think of that as our inner and outer experience too, how things in our world um, have to actually physically come into our body for it to be used and to become who we are. So there's a little bit of kind of like, we often use this infinity sign of how things flow back and forth, inside to outside. They become one and the same thing. It's just that how we're looking at them and when they're looking at them is a matter of perspective as to when it's outside or inside of us. And so magnesium is a really powerful thing that I mean, it regulates our bones and the relaxing of our tissues, like Masami said. And there's this quote that we often use with it that comes from Rumi, which is, a hand that is always closed or always open is a crippled hand. And magnesium is actually one of the main mechanisms that our body uses for that physical opening and closing, the relaxing of tissues so that we can receive. So it's a very important mineral, especially in the heat of summer right now, where we're losing so much of it due to heat stress. And we also lose a lot of it due to normal everyday stress. So we have to keep putting it back. And that's why 75% plus of our populations are magnesium deficient, is because we're not putting back in to replace all that's displaced by stress and everything else that's going on in our lives. So don't forget to take care of that as well to really enhance your receiving this month.
Well, and I have to point it out, everyone, right? I'm sure it wasn't missed on you that the infinity sign is basically the lion's gate, right? That number 8. So magnesium, please look into that. If you are having some symptoms of tightening of the muscles, maybe cramps in the middle of the night with your calves, you got to look into that. There are many, many other things, but without the magnesium, your bones really have a hard time maintaining the integrity of the strength of the bones and the movements of the bones as well. And I think this is bringing it back to the receiving side of it again. But in order to actively get involved in noticing how much you are actually receiving throughout the day, and to be so involved in that act of receiving, but to really change your mode towards receiving away from constantly clearing and releasing mode that we have been in for a long time, we need the support of the magnesium. So please do take a look at the PDF that we'll be including in below. And let's do look at, particularly this week, as very powerful week for mastering your intention for receiving. That isn't a passive receiving, but actively receiving, and begin to maybe move past that discomfort of receiving and move past that vulnerable feeling of receiving, because many of us that are listening to this are doing this as collective. So I hope you can look around and see us in the mix. You can see others in the mix to start shifting our mode towards more of this gratitude towards beauty that we're always surrounded by, and the opportunities that we have to receive always. Yeah. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And thank you, Chris, for joining me today to have this discussion with me. And until next time, take care of yourself. And please, if you like our videos, please subscribe, share the links with your friends and families, and give us thumbs up. Thank you. Bye.